Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So about a week ago, I reacted to the Athletics updated top 10 worst contracts in the NHL. And they had a lot of your usual suspects, but it was a pretty interesting list. They had Mark Scheifele at like number 6 ahead of Seth Jones and Darnell Nurse. So I wanted to revisit my personal top 10 worst contracts in the NHL. I did this in like November or December of 2023 and have not updated it since. So we have some serious updating to do, considering some guys did have pretty big bounce back years that we thought were bad contracts. A guy like Nazem Kadri's first year on his contract was pretty disappointing. This year was 75 points. No longer a bottom 10 contract for sure. So we're going to go through what I think are the 10 worst contracts in the NHL. We're going to start with number 1. I think we're going to start with number 1. In my opinion, the top 3 should be pretty consensus. And at number 1, I got Jonathan Huberdeau. Unfortunately, this guy had a rough first season in Calgary. He had 55 points, but we thought that's the floor. He's going to bounce back and at least be a 60 to 70 point guy. It was going to be still a horrible contract, but we thought that was the absolute bare bottom of his play. Not the case. He only had 12 goals this season, 40 assists, and for 52 points in 81 games. And it's not like he's some fantastic defensive winger. He's basically an all offense guy. And at this point, he's like a below average second liner. So maybe he can return. Like best case scenario is him getting back to around 60 to 70 points, but he almost single-handedly turned the Calgary Flames into a rebuilding team. So at 7 years left, $10.5 million. Yeah, it's not good. It's not looking good for the Calgary Flames. It's not even like there's like 3 to 4 years left where the rebuild's going to happen during those 3 to 4 years. Then they'll be off the books. He's going to be on the books when they're coming out of their rebuild in half a decade from now. It is absolutely brutal, and as a result, it gets the number 1 spot. Number 2, Darnell Nurse, 6 years left at $9.25 million. This just isn't good as well. You look at him in the playoffs this year, exposed at times. I think at one point he had the worst plus minus in the entire playoffs. It was like 26 out of the Oilers' 52 goals that they had allowed. He was on the ice. The underlying numbers actually are a little bit beneficial compared to what maybe the perception of him is. I think that he is an okay second pair guy. I think he is a little bit overhated because of the contract, but the contract is abysmal. He's getting legit number 1 money in the NHL for the next 6 years, and he's kind of old at this point. He's 28 or 29 years old at this point. So when looking at him, getting paid like a number 1 and is probably, we saw it this year, a number 4 on an actual contending team, only 32 points in the regular season, went from playing around 23 minutes to only playing 21 minutes a night. Very unfortunate for the Edmonton Oilers, who now, after buying out Jack Campbell, he's like the only abysmal contract remaining. Evander Kane is a little bit overpaid, but he is the one thing potentially stopping them from winning a Stanley Cup. Number 3, Seth Jones. 6 years left at $9.5 million. Similar to Darnell Nurse, could be a very impactful second pair defenseman on an actual playoff team, but he's miscast as this number 1 because he got all this money because the Chicago Blackhawks defense core is pretty shit at this point until Leshinov, until Korchinski, until Vlasic are all into their prime. He's going to be playing big minutes. He has the 5th highest cap hit in the entire NHL heading into next season. And similarly to Nurse, I believe that they are the same age and they're both have 6 years left. That takes them into their mid-30s. Brutal deal, but we have our top 3 out of the way. I think we can all agree that those are pretty consensus top 3 picks. At number 4, I have Tom Wilson, who is starting his 7-year deal at $6.5 million. It's not a ton of AAV, but when looking at Tom Wilson, a 31-year-old who had 35 points in 74 games this season, I understand that he is an enforcer. He is a more physical presence. It's not just points with him, but for a 31-year-old to have 7-year deal at legit good second liner money, and last year he actually did play a decent amount, but when looking at it, he's just not, he doesn't have both the physicality and the offensive skill that he had between 2017 to around 2021, 2022. His offensive game has fallen off to a decent degree, and he was hurt a lot of last year. So when looking at Tom Wilson, it's not going to age well. I understand that this is more so a play. He's probably going to be their next captain after Alexander Ovechkin, but it is objectively a horrendous contract that Brian McClellan ended up giving out to Tom Wilson. So as a result, I have it at number 4. Number 5, kind of a victim of injury, but I have Sean Couturier, 6 years left at $7.75 million. Yes, he is getting pretty solid. Actually, at this point, it's probably like high second liner, low first liner money. But when looking at Couturier, since he came back from being out for a year and a half with serious back problems, wasn't really the same player. Still a good defensive player, but the offensive game before the injury, he was sniffing around point per game Selke winner. Now he only had 11 goals, 27 assists, 38 points in 74 games. Again, 11 goals. This guy that was hitting 30 goals pretty regularly during his prime. So as a result, you're paying him $7.75 million for the next 6 years. He's like 31 at this point. Like, he's not a young player by any stretch of the imagination. So on a Flyers team that is still retooling, still rebuilding, this is going to be a pretty brutal contract unless he turns around his offensive game in a pretty major way. At number 6, I got Chandler Stevenson. Now, the Athletic had him number 2. I think that is extreme compared to some of those other deals, the top 4 especially. But I do think this is a pretty brutal deal. 7 years, $6.25 million. And he arguably wasn't worth that last year for the Vegas Golden Knights. He only had 16 goals, 35 assists, 51 points in 75 games. And his defensive results really fell off compared to prior years. So he's heading to Seattle. That's just not as good of a team. Maybe he'll get more opportunities. But still, I'm not sure he's going to be worth 6.25 the first couple years of this deal. And especially considering he is 30 years old, it's going to age bad, man. I understand paying massive amounts of money for a guy like Johnny Gaudreau, who might be on this list later, an actual superstar, to give 7 years to a 30-year-old of Chandler Stevenson that doesn't really have that track record. Not good from the Seattle Kraken in terms of using their money wisely. Next up at number 7, I have Johnny Gaudreau. Funny enough, when looking at it a little bit teased heading into the next one, he has 5 years left at $9.75 million. And yeah, I still think that he is a first liner, but at $9.75 million, that is legit star money. And this is a guy that had an okay 74 points in his first season, but this year that dropped all the way down to 60. I think he can get back to being a 65 to 75 kind of level guy, but at 9.75, it's not a disaster like Jonathan Huberdeau. I have way more faith in Johnny Gaudreau when looking at him, but he's probably only a $7 to $8 million player for the next couple years while he's making nearly $10 million. Next up at number 8, I got Josh Anderson. 3 years left at $5.5 million. When looking at him this year in Montreal, he was absolutely brutal. 9 goals, 11 assists, 20 points in 78 games. 3 years left, $5.5 million. His time overall in Montreal has just kind of been a total debacle, and as a result, he finds himself on this list. He's a big physical guy, but when his shot isn't really connecting on net, he is a absolute liability out there, especially defensively. So when looking at Josh Anderson, I think he's a valid inclusion. Even though he only has 3 years left, he was legitimately a league minimum player this season. So I got to have him on this list at number 8. Number 9, Torrey Krug, 3 years left at 6.5. Solid offense defenseman, but defensively kind of a black hole at this point. He did have 39 points, but last week it was announced that he had pre-arthritic surgery. So this guy's not even going to be healthy over the next 3 years. He's going to have to deal with that. Maybe you can just throw him on LTIR. But this has been an absolute disastrous signing by the St. Louis Blues. Armstrong kind of just reacted to Pietrangelo leaving, decided to give Krug this massive contract, and now at least it's halfway done. But 3 years left, 6.5 for a guy that's probably, like, if he wasn't getting paid that much, if he was on a different team, probably would just be a second power play specialist. He is no longer the elite offensive defenseman that we knew when he was on the Boston Bruins. When he was actually a good player between the ages of like 25 to 27, the Bruins were very smart to let this guy hit the open market and not actually pay him. And then at number 10, I got Pierre-Luc Dubois. I don't have an updated picture of him on the Washington Capitals, but he has 7 years left at $8.5 million. I understand that from a perspective, this most recent season, only 40 points. You can make an argument that he could be number 4, number 5. I just think that out of anybody on this list, the guy that has the best chance to turn it around is the guy that's only 26 years old. I had to include him again because he was that bad this season, genuinely a third-line center. Philip Deneau was a far better second-line center on the LA Kings. But he is still a year removed from 63 points in 73 games. The talent is there. I know the work ethic isn't really there. I know the attitude isn't really there. But I think that he definitely has a better chance to turn it around than a Torrey Krug, than a Josh Anderson. So in looking at PLD, an absolutely abysmal deal. But until I see next year in Washington, he has another, let's say, 50 points-ish. I think he's definitely going to have more than 40 next season. He's getting more opportunities on the Washington Capitals. But if he goes for 50, then I might move him up a couple spots on this list. But as of right now, I think he can potentially turn it around. So as a result, I have him checking in at the number 10 spot. But yeah, here is the final order. It goes Huberdeau, Nurse, Jones, Wilson, Couturier, Stevenson, Gaudreau, Anderson, Krug, in PLD. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this? Who would you move up? Who would you move down? I'll be seeing the next one.